everyone. I want to welcome you to downtown Denton, Texas today. I will explain my backdrop here in just a little while, but I do want to go ahead and start talking about the Civil War and how it comes to an end. Okay. Now, right before the end of the Civil War in 1864, Abraham Lincoln is easily reelected as President of the Union of the United States. Now, what's significant about this is the fact that this election was mainly taking place in northern states. The southern states did not uh, take part in this election for obvious reasons. Now, in his inaugural address, which was in March of 1865, he talked about the war coming to an end. He was ready for this war to be over. It wasn't quite over yet, but it was coming to an end. And what he talked about in his inaugural speech, his second inaugural address, was how are we going to deal with our country coming back together? How are we going to heal these wounds that have been created by this war? So we're going to watch a quick little video here about this. And this is talking about Lincoln's second inaugural address. I'm going to close this out so we can watch all together here.
The war was 4 years old when Lincoln rose to make his second inaugural address in March, and even wondering why God had let it go on so long. Before the war, Lincoln had spent very little time thinking about religion, but as the war went on, he tried to discover what God's purpose might be in this war. And I think that was part of his effort to come to grips with the enormous loss of life. Lincoln decided the war might be God's punishment on all Americans for 200 years of slavery.
Fervently do we hope that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. Abraham Lincoln, second inaugural address. This is an amazing statement for a president to make. And not in some private conversation or private memo. He says this to the whole country in an inaugural address. It's a radical thing to say.
Lincoln was proud of his speech and anxious to hear the opinion of the black leader, Frederick Douglass.
It was a wonderful story. Douglass coming into the White House after the second inaugural, huge crowds standing, shaking Lincoln's hand. And Lincoln calls out across the room, "There's my friend, Douglass. Douglass, come here." Douglass walked across this crowded room, and Lincoln says to Douglass, "What did you think of my inaugural address? There's no man's opinion that I admire more than yours." Douglass says, "It was a sacred effort." And Lincoln says, "Thank you."
So the main idea from that second inaugural address that I want to point out is this quote that we see oftentimes, and it says, "With malice towards none, with charity for all, let us strive on to finish the work we are in." So first off, he's talking about with malice towards none. That word malice means hatred. With hatred towards none and with charity for all, basically let's extend a helping hand. Let us strive on to finish up the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. We obviously have wounds in our nation right now, physically, politically. There's all kinds of wounds. So he is trying to fix our country. And part of what we're going to talk about in our next unit with Reconstruction is the idea of rebuilding our country in a positive way. So he is trying to find a way to find a just and lasting peace with the South, no matter how that's going to look. Okay, so let me get this pulled back up here. Now, this war is coming to an end, and General Lee, is surrounded. He does not have a chance of winning. Richmond has been taken by the North. Lee and his men are surrounded in Virginia, and there is no hope for them. There's no hope whatsoever. There's no chance for the South to have a resurgence here and win. So they give up. Lee knows he has to give up. He has to sign a treaty of some sort, and that's exactly what he does. Now, today I'm in front of the courthouse in downtown Denton, Texas. This did not exist during the Civil War or anytime close to it. In fact, this wasn't a city until 1896. So I don't want you to get confused here by any means, but I'm in front of the courthouse because Lee surrenders to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. Now, the terms of this surrender were very good in terms of treating the South with respect and kindness. Although they had been through so much war and so much bloodshed, Abraham Lincoln wanted to make sure that when we bind our nation's wounds or heal our nation's wounds, what he talked about in his second inaugural address, he wants to make sure that the South is welcomed back in a way that we can come back and have a relationship in a positive way, and our political system can go back to the way it was. Obviously, there's going to be some hurdles to overcome. There's going to be some obstacles there. But Lincoln wants to make sure that the South is given a fair chance and respect. Now, part of the terms of surrender is Lee, all the Southern generals, all the Southern men, all the Southern soldiers, there is no real punishment that they're going to be given here. A lot of the radical Republicans, which we're going to talk about later, the radical Republicans wanted to see punishment. They want to see these men in jail. They want to see them killed and hanged for their what they considered treason to the country. Lincoln did not want that. Lincoln wanted to make sure that when we re-accept the South into the Union, that there is no hatred, there is no malice. Okay, that word malice that he used, he wanted to make sure there's no hatred between the North and the South. And if we had sent these men to death or imprisoned them, it just would have made the situation that much worse. And Reconstruction would have been that much more terrible. Like I said, our next unit is about Reconstruction. We're going to talk about some of the rough challenges they had, but this is the first step in binding the nation's wounds. So we're going to watch a little video here about the surrender of Lee at the Appomattox Courthouse and the terms that they were given.
The South fought to the bitter end, and they only quit when Lee's army of Northern Virginia was surrounded and cut off at Petersburg and then erased to Appomattox Courthouse. And then finally Lee realized it was over.
Robert E. Lee had no choice but to surrender at that point. He came to that conclusion very reluctantly, and it was the most painful thing he ever did.
After an exchange of letters, Lee agrees to meet Grant at Appomattox Courthouse on Sunday afternoon, April 9th.
I think at Appomattox, both General Grant and General Lee showed some of their best qualities. Grant was extremely gracious in his treatment of Lee and in his treatment of the Confederate soldiers. Lee also understood that, for all practical purposes, the war was over, and he decided to focus on reuniting and rebuilding.
Robert E. Lee had become as close to a living deity as you could get. And when he surrendered, the air went out.
There was a degree of shared heritage of experience. They'd both gone to West Point. They'd both been in the Mexican War. And at the end of the day, they were all Americans. And I think that the terms of the surrender that Grant offered to Lee were really about as generous as Lee could have hoped for.
So there you have it. The terms of surrender were very great for the South. They were treated with respect. They were allowed the opportunity to take their own horses home. They were able to take their equipment home with them. They did have to lay down their arms or their weapons, but the North, there's stories about how Northerners even offered to feed these men, because many of these Southern soldiers, they were out of supplies, they were out of food, and the North extended that helping hand as a symbol to, or a gesture to, let's go ahead and rebuild. We're a family. We're a brotherhood here, and we need to reunite. So that was the end of the war. Now Lincoln, as you can see here, he aged quite a bit over these 4 years of war, and it did take a toll on him. Now, obviously, many of you know the story of Lincoln and what happened with him. When this war was over, just a few days after the war, he had gone to the theater with his wife. With General Grant, and he was watching a play. And while he was at the play, he was shot by a man named John Wilkes Booth. That's an infamous name. You need to know that name. Unfortunately, his name will continue on in history for doing what he did. But he did assassinate the president. He was an actor that he acted at this venue, and he was very familiar with the ins and outs of this venue, and he was able to gain access to this balcony that Lincoln was sitting at. This venue, Ford Theater, it's in Washington, D.C., and you can go visit that today. It's very interesting. I've been there a couple of times. But anyways, Booth, he snuck in behind Lincoln, shot him. Some people say that he quoted this Latin term, sic semper tyrannis, which basically means the tyrant. He fled the scene. He jumped off the balcony, and actually some people say that he injured his leg and broke his leg here. He ran away. He was able to get away. It took them several days to hunt him down and catch him. Lincoln was declared dead the next morning. He survived for several hours after the gunshot wound. And after this, Andrew Johnson became our president. He was the vice president to Lincoln at this time. So we're going to talk about in our next unit the legacy that Lincoln left, the effects of this war physically on our country, politically. We're going to talk about how we rebuild this country and the hurdles and obstacles that come with that. So I look forward to talking to you. Hopefully you've enjoyed this Civil War unit. Normally we have a lot more to talk about and discuss in class, but here we are, and this is it. Hope y'all are having a great day. Enjoy your time at home, and don't forget to wash your hands. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.